Welcome to Scrum Masters of the Universe. Yes, and we have with us today Tanner Wortham. And Tanner is a Marine Corp turned software professional and consultant. He helps organizations and executives turn challenges into opportunities. CEO of Wortham Consulting and Coaching, Tanner is a good friend of mine who I at times choose years. He's also a pilot. If you don't know, he flies planes. So if you were to talk to Tanner about planes, a day would not be enough. I can tell you that. A good friend of mine, let's just give a warm welcome to my friend Tanner, who will be talking today about what the Corps calls leading Marines tech calls agility. Thank you, Tanner.
Or thank you, Anu, and it is wonderful to see you again. And I'm putting everybody on my screen so I can see everyone, because there's nothing worse than just sitting in your office and no one else is here with you. So having some friendly faces on the screen is really useful. It's actually really nice to see some of you that I know well and I haven't seen in some time, like Patty and Jesse and Jim, John, oh my God, so many, and some from my meetup this morning. So I have exciting news. This is the very first time I'm ever giving this presentation and having this conversation. You are my debut audience for this talk. It is long. I'm probably not going to have a lot of times at the end for questions, but I want all of your questions because it's going to help me make this better for the next time I give it, whether that's virtually or whether that's at a conference. I know Triagile, I'll be giving it there in Raleigh, where I live. I'm also probably going to be speaking on this in Agile 2025 in Denver that's coming up. I believe it's in July. So help me make this better for when I'm in a room with actual human beings and give this talk. I've said this time and time again over the years that what the Corps calls leading Marines, we call agility. The struggle that I've had is trying to unpack what that means. And I think it's taken me the better part of 15 years to really find the language to be able to talk about this. But first things first, I guess, what makes me qualified to talk about this? So let me tell you a little bit about me before we get started. I currently work for myself as an executive coach and also as an execution architect, which is just a fancy way of saying I help people, teams, and organizations deliver. Before working for myself, before having my own practice, I was at Salesforce for a few years, and I was at LinkedIn for a few more before that. I worked in ed tech, in gaming, in the law enforcement space, in the airline industry, everything from software engineer, tech lead, business systems analyst, project manager, program manager, technical program manager, scrum master, agile coach, director of technical program management. My point is I've just done lots of different things over the years and I get bored really quickly, I guess. But it's been a lot of fun. Been working for myself since 2023. Been writing and speaking at conferences since about 2016 and started in tech in 2006. But the more interesting part is probably this guy right here. This was me. Look at this picture. Jesus, I was freaking young once. This was me 20 years ago. This was, I think, 2005. And I worked as an intelligence operative and martial arts instructor from 95 until 2006. So for about a decade, I was in the Marine Corps. I used to do missions for the CIA, FBI, SEAL teams, NSA, whole bunch of super secret work. It actually isn't nearly as exciting as you might think. I was just in buildings without windows all the time, and it got really stuffy. But I did learn a lot. I learned a lot about leadership. I learned a lot about agility, and we're going to talk about that today. But I do remember when I got hooked on tech. It was when I was stationed in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The person who ran the website, she was about to move away, and she says, "Hey, does anybody want to take over this unofficial website?" And you got to imagine, I think this was 1998. So this was the land of animated GIFs everywhere and dial-up modems and music that would just start playing when a page load. It was terrible. For anybody who was around the internet back in 1998, it was terrible, but I was hooked. I loved it, and that's kind of how I ended up in tech later. But it was, there we go. It was this guy. Some of you might recognize him. It was this guy who had a huge influence on me over the years. His name is General Mattis, General John Mattis. He was our old Secretary of Defense for some time. I remember the very first time I met him. I was sitting at breakfast with a bunch of other Marines, and he comes over and violently grabs me by the shoulder and loudly says, "How's it going, Marine?" And I look up and I see stars. I'm like, Jesus, this is freaking General Mattis. The man sat down with us at a table and just had a conversation with us. Never met a leader in his position who was so curious about how we were and who we were and what we did and what was going on in our worlds, or a leader so engaged in giving like very candid and very transparent answers to any questions that we have. Huge influence on who I am as a leader, and he was the very last Marine I spoke to on the way out the door when I resigned in 2006. And it was, I think, 2011 when I ran across a book called Core Business by David Friedman. And in that book, he had interviewed some of the most influential Marines at the time, and he had distilled those interviews down to what he called the 30 management principles of the Marine Corps. 3 of them are on your screen. And I think as you read them, you kind of appreciate they have a bit of an agile flavor to them. And of the 30 that he had written about, I would say about 20 of them really do kind of smell like what agile is all about. And that's where I started having this notion that what the Corps called leading Marines, we call agility. And I've been leaning into it ever since. And I've kind of shaped my career around that. Now, before we get into this, I'm curious from all of you if you agree, if you believe that the Marine Corps has something to teach us. So what I want you to do is there's a QR code on the screen now. Scan that QR code. You're going to see a few questions through our conversation today. And what I want you to do is you tell me yes, no, or maybe you'll figure that out on the other side of this session. I'll give you all a moment to start filling that out. And while we're doing that too, I'm not going to pay much attention to chat, but I am for a moment. Are there any other vets in the room?
Yeah, I was a Navy corpsman with the Marines.
Hoorah. Hoorah.
Yes,
Super fun.
yeah, I was a Navy corpsman with the Marines.
You know what, man? I absolutely love that. Corpsmen were some of my favorite people because they gave me all the Tylenol I needed when I was hurting. So I always made nice with every corpsman I ever ran into. Any Marines here?
Yes,
Oh, tell me
Tanner,
I'm not the only one.
I am a Marine as well.
Rich, I didn't know that, man. You should have told me
Yeah.
that this morning at our meetup.
I was going to mention it, but I will say for everyone else's benefit here, my experience in the Marine Corps, which predates yours, wasn't very agile. So I'm interested to hear more. I wish I could stay for the whole meeting, but because I'd love to hear that that's the case. I first heard David Marquette about maybe 8 or 9 years ago, and when I heard him talk about how he had changed things in the Navy, I was a little credulous, I'd say. So
I will
we'll
be
see.
curious for your thoughts when we get done today, Rich, for whatever part you get to sit through.
Yeah, and I'll watch the video afterwards. So.
Yeah. 89% yes. I'm glad there's some agreement. I'm sad that there's no disagreement though, but maybe after this talk, people will disagree. Maybe no, the Marine Corps has nothing to do. We'll see. We'll get there. So, oops, there we go. Why does it matter? I want to give you 2 reasons why I think it matters, why a branch of the military has anything to do what many of us do as a living. And I'm going to start with this one, which is everything is connected to everything else. I've found over the last 4 or 5 or 6 years that some of my biggest learnings, some of my biggest epiphanies don't come when I pick up a book about Scrum or come by reading the 10 best ways to facilitate a retro. They usually come somewhere else. They come from other domains like economics or organizational psychology. Adam Grant comes to mind. Or another one that I love is this, emergence from biology. It's the idea that from dumb things come complicated and intelligent things. An ant by itself is not particularly intelligent, but an ant colony is intelligent and self-organizing for that matter. And in fact, this animation you see here was taken from a research study where some scientists wondered if a colony of ants could take this obstacle or take this object through this obstacle course. And fun fact, they also took a bunch of humans, blindfolded them and said you can't talk to one another and had them do the same course. The ants won. They were faster. So at least in this case, emergence tells us that ants are smarter than humans. A second reason I think it matters comes from a quote from Victor Krulak, a very famous general in the Marine Corps from many years back. He says that America doesn't need a Marine Corps, it wants one. And all Marines are taught as young Marines, don't screw this up for everybody else. That the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force can already do all the things that we do, mostly. It is up to you to continue in this sentiment that America wants a Marine Corps because it doesn't quite need one. And I don't need to tell this room that Agile is going through some stuff. And I think it's important. In fact, if you look at the State of Agile reports from 2022, where it said that 87% of organizations reported using Scrum. And then 1 year later, 365 days later, that dropped almost a full quarter to 63% of organizations were using Scrum. If there is any time that our teams should want us there, but perhaps don't need us there, if there's any time that that sentiment matters, I feel like it's now. So here's how we're going to have this conversation today. I'm going to give you 3 principles that I think both operate in the Agile coaching space, in the Scrum space, and also operate for me as a Marine, as a leader of Marines. With each one of those 3 principles, I'm going to share some stories of both my time in the Corps and as a coach to really deepen our understanding of what that principle means. And then because I want you to walk away with something you can actually do something with, I'm going to offer you a few things that you could potentially try in your own organizations tomorrow based on those 3 principles. And the first one we're going to talk about is this: build authority on demand into the hierarchy. Now, full disclosure, I kind of hesitated to start here because what I'm about to do is give you a bunch of structure and theory from the Marine Corps, and it doesn't, at least to me, feel like a very interesting or engaging story, but I feel like it's necessary to start there. So what I want to do to start with is describe how the Marine Corps is structured from the bottom up, and then talk about how information finds its way from top down. So how the Marine Corps is structured from the bottom up. The smallest unit in the Marine Corps is a fire team. In a fire team, there are 3 Marines and the fire team leader. In a squad, you have 3 fire teams and a squad leader. In a platoon, you have 3 squads and a platoon leader. In a company, you have 3 platoons and a company commander. I'm sure you're starting to sense the pattern already. It's what I call the rule of 3. And I don't mean like the McKinsey rule of 3, and I don't mean the rule of 3 that you find in literature about how you should talk about things in 3. This is a different kind of rule of 3 where the Marine Corps stumbled across this idea that in times of crisis, a human can only conceptualize 3 things at once. If you have them thinking of 4, they freeze and they've got to think. And when bullets are flying, the last thing you want is for a Marine to freeze. And if you're only thinking of 2, then you're not fully leveraging the capacity of your Marines. And I don't know if there's any research that backs up this notion of the rule of 3, but anecdotally and from my experience, it certainly rings true. But there's a few other ways that it's useful too. One of them is imagine I'm a platoon commander, and instead of having to think of 33 Marines at once, I instead only have to think of squads 1, squads 2, and squad 3. So I only have 3 things to think about. By the way, that dog is so freaking cute, Rich. Thank you for that moment. And that abstraction is really useful when it comes to decision making. I'm only thinking of 3 things. But there's another thing that makes it really useful too, is that it creates this intentional mentorship pyramid of sorts. Imagine I'm a squad leader and I'm kind of unsure of what to do. I might go to my platoon commander or my platoon sergeant and say, here's my situation. What do you think? And that platoon sergeant is going to know my Marines because he is their boss's boss. They're going to know me. They're going to know the orders that I've been given because they probably gave them. And then they're going to be able to give me, hopefully, some great advice, rich in the context of where I'm at, or ask me a bunch of questions to help me get there. And that platoon sergeant gets promoted not only on how well he shows up as a leader, but also on how well I, as a squad leader, show up as a leader. So he is incentivized to give me good advice. That notion of him always teaching me and me having a way and a place to go is very, very important, because if you're going to build authority on demand into the hierarchy, you also have to make sure you're building smart Marines. So let's talk about how you get information from the top down. One of the constructs that they use is called the 5-paragraph order. The reason it's called the 5-paragraph order, it has 5 paragraphs. Not particularly creative at naming things in the Marine Corps, but the 5 paragraphs are situation, mission, execution, administration, and logistics, command, and signals. You don't need to know any of that. What you need to know is it's answering 3 questions. What's important? Who's important? And why is it important? The way a 5-paragraph order is given is, imagine a company is about to go into combat, and a company commander takes about 5 minutes to generate these 5-paragraph orders. It's very quick and dirty and easy to do. He takes about 5 minutes. He grabs his 3 platoon commanders into the room. He reads out that 5-paragraph order. Now imagine I am one of those platoon commanders. I now take a few minutes to reflect on that order from my captain. I then generate my own order for my 3 squad leaders, and I get all 3 of my squad leaders in the room at the same time. I give the what's important to them. I give the mission, is what this is called, to them, and it'll look similar to what you see on the screen. I give 1 mission to 1st squad. I give a 2nd mission to 2nd squad. I give a 3rd mission to 3rd squad. They are all there in the room when I'm giving those missions, so they all hear about what's going on around them. But there's another part to this too, which you see grayed out at the very end. But before I talk about that, I'm curious from the room. Give me a thumbs up if you like stretch goals, and give me a thumbs down if you don't like stretch goals. Thumbs up if you like stretch goals, thumbs down if you don't like stretch goals. I'm seeing lots of thumbs up. I'm seeing a few thumbs down. I'm curious if I'm going to be outnumbered. I think I am. Okay. I don't like them. I realize, and I've seen some research on how stretch goals are useful for highly effective teams. And while that might be true, I think highly effective teams are a lot less common than we like to think they are. Usually, how I see stretch goals work out is that you end up with a team who not only don't complete their primary mission, they also don't complete the stretch goal that they've been given. So now you have 2 things undone, and they're a little demoralized for it too. So let me tell you how the Marine Corps comes at it that's a little bit different. It's that last sentence. That's telling you who's important. One of my squads, in this case, 1st squad, is identified as the main effort. That means that the other 2 squads, I'm going to identify as you are the supporting effort. What that means is I'm telling my squad that 3 things are important to me. This one is the most important to me. And what that means for my 3 squad leaders as they're hearing this read out is that 2nd and 3rd squad, if they see 1st squad's mission start to fall over, they abandon their own and they prop up 1st squad's mission because that must not fail. That feels a much more realistic model for how to get things done. That's kind of like, but I think better than stretch goals. Finally, why is it important? This is communicated through what's called commander's intent. And again, I've given you an example of what that looks like here. The way, if I was a platoon commander, the way I might write this is I might take exactly what my company commander gave me and not even change a thing. And where it's useful is if my squads are completing their mission and they have this in mind, maybe there's a different way they could come at it to accomplish it. Maybe there's a better way that they can come at it. Or maybe they're not doing so well and they need to come up with some ideas to salvage whatever's going on. And if they can still meet the commander's intent, even if they're not meeting their mission, then they still accomplish something. So it's the why of the why of the importance. But I don't want to just talk about the Marine Corps either. I want to give you a story about Atanas. Jim Lesko, who I think is in the room, knows Atanas because Jim used to be my old boss. And Atanas worked in our organization. Atanas was a very gifted product manager. He was great at synthesizing a great amount of information. He was great at communicating that to a team. He was great at getting the team on board with the decisions that were going to be made and including him in those decisions. There was a lot of gravity around Atanas in his decisions because he was such a gifted PM. But the problem he ran into, he was about to take 2 months off. He was going to go visit family out in Greece. He wasn't going to be around. So he and I discussed what to do. He didn't want the team to flounder. We didn't have a substitute PM that could sub in for him while he was out. We couldn't give all the responsibilities to a single team member because that would have overwhelmed the team member, especially when they still have other responsibilities. So we sat down and we decided to deliberately delegate pieces of the work to different people on the team. But there were two things that Atanas did that I think was what made this a true success. Number one, for all those delegates that we identified, he would invite them to meetings where they had access to information that they didn't have before and access to people that they didn't have before. The second thing he did is in conversations like refinement and planning, he mostly didn't talk. He let his delegates make the decisions. And only from time to time did he veto those decisions. And only from time to time did he chime in if context wasn't being provided from that delegate in a way that would have helped the team arrive at some conclusion. So shortly after Atanas went on vacation, and this was a co-located space, so everybody worked in the same building, and that team sat like right over there from if I was sitting at my desk at that office, right over there. And I saw some chatter in chat, and everybody got together around one of these delegates' desk. Something was about to fall over. They talked about it for a little bit. This delegate heard some dissent about what she wanted to do. They worked it out. They got back to work. They propped it right back up. Do you know what I did through all that? Not a damn thing. And I'm proud of it. Even better than that is it was a 19-year-old designer who was the delegate and who was in charge. It was her first job out of college. She was surrounded by veterans who had been at the company for a while and had had several jobs. And she absolutely crushed it because she embraced the authority that she was given. That's magnificent to see. So I promised you a few things that you could try in line with this idea of building authority on demand. And the first one is this. Do what we were just talking about. I usually call it Epic Champions. You might have tried it before. You might have a different name. But don't just do it in name only. Make sure you give those people access to information and make sure you let those people actually decide something. I think that's the part that matters. I think anybody who has played with it before has found that you kind of just title them, you give them like a name tag, and then that's it. Make sure that they have authority to make decisions. The second thing I give you is this. Purposely skip a meeting where you're key. And I don't mean just not show up. I mean, you say, hey, team, I can't make that meeting on Monday. I still want you all to have it. Here's what I'm hoping you're going to get out of it. I'm going to follow up with Bill on the other side to see how it went. One of the things I've seen from very gifted change agents is their ability to create voids that are just the right size, that are in just the right place, and at just the right time. If you create too big of a void, the team flounders and they don't grow from it. If you create too small of a void, they don't figure things out for themselves enough and they don't progress enough through whatever change that they're operating in. So this is an opportunity here to how you create a void and how you learn for yourself. Are you needed? Are you wanted? Or is it something else entirely with that team? But find a way to skip an event where you think you're key so that they can figure it out for themselves. And the last one here, I always limit your priorities to 3. Again, this is all about the rule of 3 here. And I'm a little bit vague when I say priorities because your organizations are all going to be different. Perhaps it's OKRs, perhaps it's KPIs, perhaps it's something entirely different. But find a way to limit your priorities to 3. Even better than this, find a way to co-create them with your boss. Find a way to say, here are the 3 things that we think are most important and agree on them. And when your boss comes to you with 4, 5, and 6, you ask, how does that fit in? And perhaps instead of ending up with more work, perhaps your manager can run interference for you. Because I don't know about you, but most times when I have met with my manager over the years, I didn't end up with less work at the end of that meeting. I ended up with more. And if there's a way that I can limit my priorities to 3, I'm all for it. And I hope you are too. All right. That's principle number 1. I like this one more. I call it rewarding failure, or at least I used to call it rewarding failure. And then I got a lot of pushback, and rightfully so. People would say, well, you're emphasizing the wrong things. You shouldn't be emphasizing failure. It's the learning from the failure that matters. And I agree with it, but I struggled to find the language that really explained where my head was until I was reading Culture Code. A great book. I was reading Culture Code. The author had a phrase in there. It was kind of a throwaway phrase, but it always stuck with me. And what it was face towards the problem. That's what I really meant. It's like police officers who run towards the scene of a shooting rather than the rest of us running away from it. It's facing towards the problem. Or I'll give you a different example. There's a dictionary out there that rather than being ordered alphabetically, it's ordered by frequency. They reviewed a ton of literature. They scanned it all. They figured out which words were used most, and they ordered it by those words, and then all the way down to which words were used least. And would you believe that yes is used more often than no? I would. It's easy to say yes to more stuff. Yes means that you're helpful and you're agreeable and you're cooperative. No, though, no can mean a confrontation or an argument or something undesirable. So my hypothesis is that people are terrible at facing towards the problem. And I'll give you an even better example of this. There was a study done by a researcher named Dan Kahan. And what Dan had done was he started interviewing people, and he would say, so we've given some rash cream to some amount of people. And then for our control group, we didn't give them any rash cream. And this is the data that we found from the people we gave rash cream and the people we didn't give rash cream to. So let me ask you, person, did the rash cream make the rash better, or did it make the rash worse? Now, all of you who are looking at the slide right now are probably doing the mental math to answer that question, and I'll buy you some time. What Kahan was doing as well is he also evaluated numeracy. And numeracy was simply a score of how good you are at math. If you scored a 1, you weren't particularly good at math. If you scored a 10, you were really good at math. And for those who haven't noticed yet, this is a proportion problem. The answer to the question is at least according to the data that you're seeing here, the rash cream did not make the rash better. But here's the thing. Kahan was not interested in your skincare routine. He was interested in something else. The data that you're looking at here is entirely made up. It's entirely fabricated. Because the question that Kahan was trying to answer is, how are people going to behave when instead of looking at data about rash cream, they're looking at data about their own political ideologies? So he took the exact same data and instead relabeled it to talk about gun control. And perhaps in one city, they had some gun control laws and it increased crime and decreased it in another way. And perhaps in another city, they didn't have gun control laws. And he would put this data in front of people. And he would ask them again, did gun control increase or decrease crime? What he found was that regardless of your numeracy score, regardless of how good you are at math, if the data did not agree with your political ideologies, then you are no less likely to recognize the proportionality in the data. Let me say that differently and more simply. People are terrible at facing towards the problem. It's a hard thing to do. So then the question becomes, how do you get better at it? Has any of you ever seen Wipeout? Old show on TV a long time ago. I'm seeing some heads nod. It was an awesome show. I absolutely loved it. It needs to come back. It's freaking amazing. For those who didn't see it, what they did is the creators of the show created these very elaborate obstacle courses. And as an audience member, you're not interested in watching people get to the other side successfully. You're interested in seeing someone bounce off the red balls, flip 3 times in the air, and land on their stomach in the water. I'm embarrassed to say how funny I found it and still find it today. Freaking awesome show. The Marine Corps has its own version of this. We call it a leadership reaction course, LRC. And how it works is this, is you get 4 to 6 Marines together and you put them in front of an obstacle course. One of those Marines is identified as the leader of the group. An evaluator pulls that leader aside and he says, all right, here's the deal. I want you to get you and all your Marines to the other side of this obstacle. If you fall in the water, you're dead. If you step on a red X, that's a landmine, you're dead. Here's 3 2x4s. Here's some rope. Here's some duct tape. You get 10 minutes, go. And from there, the evaluator, just like an audience member of Wipeout, is not interested in watching you get to the other side. You're likely not going to do it. He's interested to see how those Marine leaders and how those Marines behave in the face of failure when a few of them get themselves dead. So he's looking for things like, how long did he brief what they needed to do next? With that time crunch, did he just go right into it, or did he give at least a synopsis about what's about to happen? What did he do when one of the Marines inevitably fell into the water? How did he get them focused but still acknowledge what just happened? What happens if the leader themselves fall into the water or step on a landmine? How does the team behave, and did they get themselves killed rather brazenly? After the event, they will debrief with the evaluator to see how things went. And just because in the Corps we're rather mean about it, we also made a point to do these kinds of events when you were tired, when you were hungry, when you've run mile after mile after mile, because then your emotions are right underneath the surface, and it gives the evaluators something to really see so that they have something to really talk about. But not always did we have an obstacle course. Many of us leaders of Marines had to go at it a little bit differently, and often we were given things to do. Let's say I'm a platoon sergeant, I was given something to do for my platoon. I would find a Marine who might be a little bit in over their head if I gave them a particular task. It would be something where nobody would get hurt. It would be something where the cost of failure was low. I would consider those Marines. I would find that one who might struggle a little bit with it, and I would give it to him or her. If they succeeded, then the lesson there was for me. The lesson is maybe I underestimated this Marine and I need to reevaluate what I'm looking at. But usually what happened is that they would flounder and they would fail. And the way those conversations would begin was with this: good initiative, bad judgment. What that's keying them into is that I'm glad you did something, but what you did wasn't quite the right thing to do. And time again, not once did I ever face any Marine who got defensive about those conversations. All of them were primed to be curious because they soaked up every bit of learning they could. And they always started simply: good initiative, bad judgment. Now, there was a team I remember working with in gaming when I was working in the gaming space. Jesse, you're here, aren't you? I see you, Jesse. You're going to love this. You know these names. You know these people. I was working in gaming, and I was asked to be a Scrum Master for a team. It was a team I knew a few of the members of, but it wasn't a team I've worked with a lot. It was a team that was responsible for creating prototypes. So they would create really fast versions of games. The studio leadership would decide if that's a game worth investing in, and then they would take it from there. But I remember facilitating their very first retro. And we got to the part where we would talk about what could have been done better during the sprint. And Mike, one of the team members, very quickly goes, "Hey, Patrick, man, you let me down. You were supposed to deliver something to me by Wednesday. You didn't. It was by Friday before I freaking got it. And it painted me into a corner, and I do not appreciate it." And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, Jesus, I'm going to have to diffuse this situation really fast before Patrick jumps across the table and grabs Mike by the neck. And before I could, Patrick chimes in and he's like, "You know what? You're right, Mike. I could have done better. I realized my mistake a little bit too late. And here's what I've learned, and here's what I'm going to do next. What do you think?" And that team got it. That team understood. Patrick at least got it. They understood what it means to face towards the problem. They understood what it means to be accountable to this stuff and have these really useful and high bandwidth conversations. So that's my first advice for all of you, is reward all those who do embrace their mistakes. Be sure to do so immediately, enthusiastically, and show your gratitude for them expressing the behaviors that you hope to see from all your team members. But I also realize that not all of us work in organizations where it's safe to do that, or at least your team members might not feel that way. So maybe it's up to you to epitomize that by building a habit of self-correction. I remember a boss of mine years ago, we did some stuff. It didn't quite go to plan. And he and I were sitting down and talking about it. And I go, "Man, I failed." And he goes, no, it's not like that. It's not that you failed. It's like, no, hold on a second. Let me explain. Anytime I have failed or I feel like I could have done better, I'm going to say I failed. Because to me, that is the signal that school is in session. Failing sucks. So by using those words, it signals to me that I'm going to be uncomfortable, but perhaps I can soak up enough from this that I'm not going to make that same mistake again. So for all of you, if it's useful, find your own safe word towards building this habit of self-correction. Mine is I failed. Perhaps yours will be something different. If there is no other slide that you pay attention to in this entire deck and in this conversation today, this is the one. This is my very favorite right here. Intentionally do hard things. I don't mean hard like stretch goals. I'll give you a few examples of what I mean. I'm a pilot. I'm also afraid of heights. It literally took me years to get past the anxiety that showed up, that I was irrationally going to forget everything about landing a plane. Literally years. I'd say about 700-800 landings in, I finally calmed down and realized I wasn't going to spontaneously forget. When I was stationed in Cuba, I used to scuba dive. It's gorgeous, beautiful. Came up with these awesome conch shells. I would give them as gifts to family members for Christmas. I'm not a good swimmer. I don't like the water very much, but it was a really fun thing to do. I also do not like being the center of attention. I do not like speaking in front of people, yet here I am. What is this? 40 freaking minutes later talking to all of you. I'm an introvert. I love to watch and absorb. I'm going to need a nap after this. This is hard, but I do it anyway because I think that I'd rather learn how to do hard things on my own terms when the risk is low than on someone else's terms when the risk might be high. Intentionally do hard things on your own terms. Got another question for all of you, which will give me a nice break to drink some water. If you had to pick, or if you could pick only one, intentionally do hard things, or I'm sorry, facing towards the problem, or building authority on demand into the hierarchy, if you could only pick one, which would you pick? Oh, facing towards the problem's winning. Authority is catching up. Oh, a 50-50 split would be so cool right about now, wouldn't it? I'm going to give it another few seconds for anyone else. Oh, now facing towards the problem's really kicking authority's ass, isn't it? Look at that. 75 to 25%. 76. Okay. I agree with the majority here. I think it's also facing towards the problem. The way I view it is building authority on demand is the structure, and facing towards the problem is the mindset, the mentality. And if you have a mindset of facing towards the problem, you will eventually find your way to the right structures. If you don't have the mindset, you will probably never find the right structures or operate, even if you had the right structures, in the way that matters. So if one is about what you're doing and the other one is about what you're thinking, let's talk about how you get there from where you are today to where you might want to be. And this is my final principle for all of you, which is experiment obsessively. Sprint chess, that's a fun game. I bet no one's ever heard of this. The rules of it are simple. It's just like regular chess, except you only get to move after you run down to the cone and get back to the board. And if you run faster than the other guy, then you get more moves. But if you run faster than the other guy, you're going to be tired while you're making those moves, and you might make terrible moves. This is the creation of a Marine commander named Brian Kerg. I ran across this a few months back. What he was doing was trying to teach his Marines this idea of thinking and fighting. He was trying to create drills around thinking and fighting. And from this game alone, he created this elaborate series of different ways to do drills in units as large as a battalion, 1,000 people, 500 people, maybe 1,000. 750, I think, is about the right number. But anyway, he created these elaborate drills where whole units of Marines would be able to do these exercises in thinking and fighting. And the reason it matters is because you don't go as a Marine to the site of a battle, get a good night's rest, and then fight the next morning. No, you get there as fast as you can, you're tired, and now you have to shoot at people. It's not a lot of fun, and you're really tired while you're doing it. So knowing how to think when you're tired is important. And this is what Brian Kerg was trying to get after. But here's another example too, and you might remember this slide from before when we were talking about building authority on demand into the hierarchy. The way I told that story sounded like a straight line. The Marine Corps thought, ooh, we should decentralize leadership. Oh, rule of three sounds fantastic. Yes, now let's build the Marine Corps off this whole notion of the rule of three. But let me tell you some of the real parts of the story here that you're not hearing that really leans into this idea of experimenting obsessively. Imagine it's 1968 and it's the Vietnam War. Specifically, imagine if it's the Tet Offensive. During the Tet Offensive, it was a bunch of urban warfare. And the kinds of things that worked on the open battlefield when the Marine Corps had superior firepower do not work when you're trying to clear rooms or you're trying to clear floors or you're trying to clear streets. The Marine Corps realized they were woefully equipped for the small unit leadership and small unit tactics, and they had to learn quickly to fill in that gap. So what they started to do during the Tet Offensive was they started to debrief after all their battles to see what was working. Are we getting information down to those lowest units? Is that information useful? What were they missing? What did they need? What is the right size? Is it 3? Is it 2? Is it 6? Is it 5? What's really working? How do we ensure our Marines are behaving very fluidly in a very decentralized way as they can't see one another inside all these buildings? What happens if you use flamethrowers? What happens if you use silencers? They were experimenting with lots and lots of things. My point is the stories that you hear at conferences sound very linear, but when you are experimenting obsessively, it is very, very non-linear. And if the Marine Corps can experiment on the battlefield when people can potentially die, I'm pretty sure we can figure out a way to do it too. I'll tell you another story that I really like about a researcher named Gary Klein. He believed that the conventional decision-making models were all wrong. So he started to follow around like nurses and EMTs and doctors. And he started to annotate and observe and research and watch all these people to see how they were making decisions. And it turns out that he was right. The conventional model of decision-making was all wrong. What he realized, though, is you can't teach the right model. And the way the model in his eyes work is it's kind of summed up in what my flight instructor used to tell me, that life gives you the test before it provides you the lesson. And in other words, what he was telling me is you're going to be tested in some ways where you're not quite prepared. Hopefully, you're not tested in a way that gets you killed. And when you're tested in those ways, build that pattern matching algorithm in your mind to account for what you learned from that mistake. And that was the model that Klein had run into, is kind of an intuition-based model where you learn to get better and you learn to make better decisions through your experiences, both your successes and your failures. Well, there was a Colonel Wood from the Marine Corps who ran into Gary Klein's research, and he was absolutely in love. He loved what Klein was thinking. He gave Klein a call. And as the story goes, he says, I want you to come in a month from now, and I want to give you a week to teach my young Marines this decision-making model that you've been researching. What do you think? And Klein didn't know what to laugh at first. Does he laugh at the part that you want me to create a curriculum in a month for something that's unteachable? And you want me to teach it in a week for something that's unteachable? Or you want me to teach it to a bunch of 19-year-olds who still are figuring themselves out? Klein didn't know what to laugh at first. And I love this quote from Wood. Listen, son, all I want you to do is give it your best try. I think that really leans into this idea of good initiative, bad judgment. Just try something. It might not work, but right now we're less interested in success and we're more interested in learning. And it was from this that Klein actually went in with the Marine Corps. It was a kick in the ass he needed to actually try this out and maybe find out that you can teach this model. And he did. He created this thing called the recognition prime decision making. And the steps for how it works is essentially on your screen here. And it's still the way I think as a coach. And it was the way I thought as a Marine. It was the Marine Corps that taught me this model. It's a really useful way to think about this. And the way that Klein learned to teach it was kind of like the LRC. He would put people in over their head. They were simulating battles and they were ambushed and then their weapons failed. And immediately after that simulation ended, he would talk to them. So what did you learn? What was the first thing that went through your mind when you were ambushed? What is it that you would have wanted to do differently? So he was putting themselves in situations where they could learn from it in ways that were still safe. And I would say the Marine Corps are geniuses at extreme training. And it was Klein, I think, who pioneered a lot of that. I want to give you one more example. And this was me as a coach. I remember working for a startup, about 80 to 100 people strong. And my team was responsible for maturing the operating model in the organization. But they were doing great. The kinds of ways for them to get where they needed to be next isn't the kinds of things that you would see in books. I mean, they were on the edge of some really interesting stuff. And I and my team were being stretched of how we could help them get to the next level. And I thought to myself, how can I use, rather than just our own brains on my team and mine, how can I leverage the collective intelligence of the entire organization? So I started figuring some things out. And I started experimenting towards this idea of building a culture of experimentation. And I have a whole talk about this. In the slides that they'll send you later, I linked the talk that I've given at several conferences over the years about this whole story, but I'm going to bottom line a few things for you today. A few things that we did is, number one, we coalesced a whole bunch of data from a whole bunch of data sources so that a team can compare itself to itself at different points in time. We didn't want a team comparing itself to others. We wanted a team to compete with itself. We wanted a team also to find ways to get 1% better. We also, before a team would run an experiment, they would sit down with leadership. And when I'm talking about experiments, I'm not talking about small things like Bill and Sally should pair more. I'm talking about big things that would make our leaders uncomfortable, like what happens if we abandon Scrum and use Kanban instead? Or what if we do 1 week sprints instead of 2, or 1 day sprints? Ooh, that's crazy. Or what about whip limits? We've never tried them before. They sound scary, but how can we explore them and experiment with them safely? Those kinds of experiments, they would sit down with leaders. And in these conversations, it wasn't a gatekeep. We weren't trying to tell them no. We just wanted to get curious about what they were about to embark on. So we would ask them, like, how long is your experiment? What's your hypothesis? What do you think is going to go up? What do you think might go down? How long are you running your experiment? What confounding variables do you think you're going to run into that you're not measuring for that might impact what you're about to do? And then at the end of these experiments, we would have another conversation about what did you discover? What did you learn? Did you prove your hypothesis or disprove it? But most importantly, the question of, would you recommend this experiment to another team or not? That one was really useful because if one team found success, the second team would try it. And if 2 teams found success, it would cross-pollinate that experiment likely across all the teams in the organization. So it helped the teams uncover, at least in that context, what worked for everyone. And it also helped them avoid the things that weren't working for 1 or 2 teams. Now, I want to bottom line the lessons that I at least took away from that experience. And one is change is uncomfortable, change is weird. And if you can find a way to marry data with the emotions of it, you can reflect on it in better ways. Number 2, the status quo in every organization is strong. Finding a way to battle against that current by setting an expectation of continuous evolution or continuous improvement is a very important thing to do. And number 3, and most important, the people who are required to change should also be the people who get to decide how they change. I want to say that one again because it's very important. The people who are required to change are also the people who get to decide how they change within reason. It's that within reason bit that's incredibly tricky, but I'm not even going to talk about it today. But I do think the people who change or are required to should have a say in how. I'll give you one cautionary tale, and then I'll give you a few tips to close. There was a team at LinkedIn. The team was like, hey, we really want you to come and help us out. We think we could use your help. And in fact, we want you to join this thing that we're going to do. We do it every single quarter, whether we need it or not. We sit down, we talk about how the quarter went. We find some great things that we could be doing differently. The whole team is engaged, and they come up with some brilliant ideas. I couldn't get past the part of once a quarter. Remember, this is experiment obsessively, not experiment occasionally. And I bit my tongue. I sat in on the meeting. I did not facilitate that one. I sat in on it and I just watched. And they were right. It was great conversations. They all were engaged. They came up with some brilliant ideas. Ones that didn't even cross my mind. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. However, as soon as the quarter started, next quarter, they got buried in all the work. And none of it actually got any traction. None of these changes got any traction. And then by the time 3 months went by again, they'd forgotten about how none of it got any traction. And then they would have a conversation again about all the magnificent things they should change. It was from my experience with that team that I came up with this prompt. And this is the first thing I'll offer you today. If you're going to start working with a new team, ask this. Tell me about the last time the team changed how it worked together that really moved the needle. And just have a conversation with that prompt. And I want to emphasize something here. This is not your opportunity to lecture and get on a soapbox. This is your opportunity to learn. They're going to tell you things like it was 2 months ago and what it was and how they recognize that it moved the needle. This is not your opportunity to say, I think you should do it this way, or this is what's really going to work. This prompt is your opportunity to learn about them, what's important to them, what they value, and how they see the world. So if you use this prompt, make it about them, make it about your learning, don't make it about theirs. The second thing I'll offer you is this. This is an illustration. I don't think it was actually in Esther Derby and Diana Larson's book, but it does. It is attributed to Agile Retrospectives, which is a great book. And this illustration is a great illustration. I absolutely believe in it. It's the idea that when a team has a retro, they diverge and have a whole bunch of different conversations about lots of things. And then there's several stages that occur. And near the end, they start converging on the best ideas, and they decide what to do with all the ideas that were in the room. It's a great illustration. I absolutely love it. It's brilliant. And I want to say this very plainly to you. Your teams don't care. We care. Your teams don't care about what's happening inside the retrospective. They're interested in, why am I here and how long is this meeting? So make it about that. What I like to do with retros is tell teams, here's the deal. We need to decide on what we're going to try about how we work together for next sprint. If we can do that in 15 minutes, then we're done in 15 minutes. If it takes us 30, that's fine too. If we're here the whole 60 minutes, I'm totally cool with that. But what matters is we find a way to try something different for next sprint about how we work together. We need to find an experiment and agree to give it a try. That's what they care about. So focus on that outcome rather than focusing on the things inside the retro. But that leads me to my final point. Experiment is a word that I see used a lot, and it is a word that I think is mostly misunderstood. What I like to do in that same kind of conversation with the team about finding these experiments and having 15 minutes or 30 minutes to figure it out is also co-create with them the litmus tests for what makes for a good experiment. It's the kinds of things that you're going to start in a day or two, and it's something that you know when it begins and it ends. You know when you're doing it, you know when you're not doing it. So it's something that's actually observable. You have to sit down and figure those out because teams struggle with this idea that if it's really small, it doesn't feel very meaningful. But I tell you what, if you're trying to lose 10 pounds, the salad you had on a Tuesday does really matter in the same way that these experiments matter. So agree on what makes good litmus tests for your experiments so that everybody is on the same page for when they've arrived at an experiment that is actually useful and operational. I have one more question for all of you. Oh my God, I did it right on. Look at that. This is the TPM in me. It still shows up. Oh, I just rolled over to 1301. Again, I mentioned this is the debut of this talk of mine, and I've been working on it literally for 15 freaking years. My question to all of you is what questions didn't I answer today that you really wish I would have? What questions didn't I answer today that you really wish I would? And I know, and I haven't been paying attention to chat, but I know there's probably lots of questions in there too. And I'm sure Katiana and Anu, there's no question. Katiana, did you shake your head? No, there's no questions. I answered everything. Everybody knows everything about the Marine Corps and Agile now. Great, mission accomplished. But yes, I would love to get some of the questions that you have of either questions that you thought about based on what you read about this meetup, or even questions that as I was talking, I didn't answer that I probably should have. And I'm hoping they're going to show up here. There we go. I'll give a moment for maybe a few more to show up, and you can also upvote some of these too. Favorite. I'm going to start there. Yeah, let's talk about that one. Favorite plane to fly and why? Well, I own a Cessna 172. I flew it from California, so I saw one ocean. And then 4 days later, I saw the Atlantic Ocean as I landed in Raleigh, North Carolina. So I'm kind of a favor my Cessna 172, but I'm currently in the middle of an engagement with a company that builds jets. And they let me sit in one of their planes the other day. And now I am making really good friends with their test pilot so that he'll take me up and let me fly their jet. Oh my gosh, I'm now spoiled. So that one might be my new favorite. What lessons from the Marine Corps can help organizations become more agile at scale? What are the transferable skills you used in the agile environment? What are the top 3 suggestions on how to be a better Scrum Master? For that one, I have a blog post called, I think I called it, Am I a Good Scrum Master? I would suggest going to my blog. You saw my my URL on my slides. It's worth.am. That one will answer that question. What about a monthly retro, or is every 2 weeks best? Team is busy, so voted for monthly. I would say let the team decide. I mean, I'm a big believer that the quicker you learn more quickly by having it more often, but there are reasons to have it less. Making sure it's the right reasons, I think, is the bit that matters. Transferable skills you used in the agile environment. You're kind of seeing some of it right now where I just kind of speak my mind in ways that might not be beneficial to my own advancement. I found being transparent and honest, but also doing so with compassion matters. I'll give you an example. Before I ever disagree with someone, I will always sit down with them for 30 minutes so they get to know who I am and I get to know who they are. Because disagreeing with a human that you don't know is going to lead to conflict. Disagreeing with a human that you do know might lead to something productive. The Marine Corps taught me that. Experiments is a scary word to leadership. Oh, how to navigate. I usually like the word, rather than using the word experiment, is use the word try. What do you think about trying something new? How do you help a team that has tried retros never get, does it? Now you want to show them it can affect change. My first question that comes to mind for me when I look at that is, do they even have any autonomy to change how they operate? And if they don't, I mean, I wouldn't want to talk either. It's a waste of time. What I typically like to do if I have the choice and go into an organization is we don't even need to worry about adopting all the parts of Scrum. What matters right now is we're going to sit down every other week or maybe every week and talk about how we want to operate differently. You will have full control over that. And then over time, as I listen to their ideas, and I don't offer them my own, over time, they start asking me, well, what do you think? What would you do? And then I'll start offering a few of my ideas. But for the most part, I do not want them to learn helplessness. I want them instead deciding for themselves, and I want them to learn to trust me through me listening to them, not through me being an expert. So my first idea is first they have to believe they can actually implement change, and then show it to them, and then maybe you can gain some traction. Okay. I'm going to stop here. Anu, Katiana?
Thank you, Tanner. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone who stayed with us till now. The video will be out soon for those who had to drop early or those who were not able to attend. With that being said, Tanner, thank you so much. And we wish you the best at TriAgile when you are going to take this to the audience. And I will be there rooting for you in person. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. See you in the next meetup on 14th of February. Bye.
Thank you.